Testing 1, 2, 3.
Getting old is not for the young.
No, it's not for the.
Not for the weak at heart. Hey, so I went to the Dodger game on Sunday.
Did you really?
The last Fernando.
Oh, man.
Julio was good.
Good weekend.
Yeah, but Julio in particular
Yeah.
was on his game. And that was good. That seemed fitting. A fitting way to, I know, but that seemed a fitting way to honor Fernando, is what I'm saying. I don't know if you noticed that, but it seemed like it was
The,
part of the text.
that.
Hey, everybody.
You know, it
Yeah,
was nice that, Andy was there.
yeah. Talking
And it was really good.
Dodger talk and Dodger history. Yeah.
Because that was the first time Coach has been to Dodger Stadium
Was it?
since he retired from, coaching.
Really?
Because they screwed it. Yeah.
Mike Scioscia caught the pitch that he threw out.
Did he?
Yeah, he didn't pitch it from the pitcher's mound, by
But
the
we have
way.
5 more wrapping.
For those who are watching, we're talking about Fernando, but it brings back a lot of memories for people who are old enough to remember how crazy that was. How crazy Fernando Mania was.
What people don't remember is 80. There was a tie and there was a one game playoff and Lasorda would not start Fernando because he came up in September of that year.
Yeah,
He would have started, and I think they started Doug Rao or something and they lost.
yeah, that was a crazy year. That was just a phenomenon.
Yeah.
Everybody got caught up in it.
He was incredible.
The Fernando Mania. The funny thing about he looks obviously much healthier now. You think about.
And he was a really nice guy. My friend, his daughter dated Fernando's daughter.
Uh-huh.
And when they were in Mexico one time, they were invited over to his house. And my friend said he's just the nicest guy.
That's awesome. But yeah, he was not he didn't always look like he was in great shape when he was pitching, but it didn't matter.
No.
Like he just did it.
So heavy.
Well, so was Scioscia, by the way.
Yeah, well, now he is.
No, but at the time too.
Yes.
Did you ever hear that story about Scioscia? That they wanted him, the trainers and the coaches wanted Scioscia to lose weight. So they bought him a exercise bike. Vin Scully told this story a long time ago. And so he had to do a certain amount of miles. And they had an odometer that they would check the odometer that where the story's going. So they would check to see whether he did his miles. So they took it on the road. They took the exercise bike on the road and stuff like that. So at one point they went to check on Scioscia, and one of the backup dudes that they had just hired was on his bike while he was sitting there eating a pizza. Well, he was sitting there, and Lasorda comes in. What the hell's going on? He sees him on the bike. Sees the other guy on the bike. So yeah. They were funny. That guy was a character though. I just thought about to do my work. Do my work for me. Do my exercise. Oh man, if only. So yeah, these guys had good personalities, but they kept showing on the screen, they kept showing different people talking about Fernando. So that was kind of cool too. They had some of the old timer, Jerry Royce, and they had some other guys talking about what it was like to play with him. And he didn't speak English. I mean, I remember that too. I mean, that was another thing. But look, there's other players that don't speak English nowadays. So
Julio supposedly doesn't speak it either. I know he does because he understands when you're interviewing him. He understands.
Yeah, I just don't think he feels comfortable enough
that's what happened
with talking. Well, we're waiting for people to come on. It's a good transition into what we're talking about today, which is our friend Jeremiah.
I didn't know
What?
this, man. You know, that article I sent you last night?
Oh,
I didn't know what an idiot that is.
oh, that talking about Michael Flynn and some of the strange things this guy seems to be obsessed with. It Jews didn't have to go to the concentration camps. They could have opted out. Now, I don't want to get on a train. Yeah, it's disturbing. And he said it repeatedly. So that's the
Yeah,
problem.
that's how
They can't,
the
they can't,
article said, 100 times he said it.
yeah, they can't get him to stop saying it. Michael Flynn, the guy who was our NSA director for like two weeks or a month.
Something like that.
Yeah. So goes around talking. People pay him to talk now, which seems like a weird thing.
Okay.
But yeah, but he
Bring him into the synagogue and
have him talk. Nah, you wouldn't want that. But yeah, some weird times we live in, no doubt, no doubt. Every day, something weird. Something you thought you'd never see. And then you see it. So yeah, but thinking it,
Where there's a walk-off home run by 3 different, I think they're all rookies.
you're talking about baseball, back to baseball. Well, I was gonna,
Come on,
no, we were done, but I was talking about the weird times we live in. We do? You just flew in with you?
John, yeah.
John brings in the bird. Oh, there he is. He's on the memorial board.
Bird prosperity.
He's probably gonna poop on me, which is always a good sign. Let's see if there's a bird in here, folks. Let's Mary, can you get the other door? No, he went into the electric room. So I think that's a sign of favor, though. What? It is? Who told you that?
My aunt, she was big on superstitions and bad luck.
For a bird to come to you?
Bird to come into a home or just the home, so yeah.
That's weird. Well,
if it's a good bird,
Doesn't matter.
I think
if it's a crow, okay.
No.
well, so I don't know what to say about that, but Jeremiah is he is the not usually looking for good stuff anyways. But no, I was reading an interesting thing that I wanted to share with you today, because we read a little bit about what Jeremiah does last week. And there's, well, just to refresh your memory, we read this interesting scene where Jeremiah has a scroll of his prophecies written down by his scribe, Baruch. And this is the part that we read. No, we're going to continue it today. But Baruch wrote down this scroll. And so, and this is earlier on in Jeremiah's times. As we saw at the beginning, it said this was in Jehoiakim. This is towards the beginning of his prophecy times. So this is during the first son of Josiah that becomes king, that he writes down a scroll. And again, with the intention that maybe people will listen and turn back. And so then it said that Jeremiah called Baruch, son of Neriah, and Baruch wrote down the scroll. Now, there are some people, some of the commentators have said that it's because Jeremiah is unable to do it himself, that he's not literate. So that's an interesting statement, which I don't really know what it's based on. I tried to find out if there's any reason to believe that Jeremiah wasn't literate. Now we know he's a priest, so he would have an extra reason to be literate. And they were kind of a higher caste of people, so that they would more likely also be literate. They would have had to do functions where they would, but the assumption is that most people weren't literate. I don't know that that's the case. It is interesting, and people, debate whether people during this time in the biblical period, not during the time of Jesus, not 500 years later, but the Roman period, but during this time, and even there's debate whether people were literate in those days, whether
people were literate, or whether they had to have a professional scribe to do their, to do their stuff.
So another question.
Yeah.
When was it first written?
Oh, I mean, we have texts that go back to Jeremiah's time that we found.
Sure.
Now, generally speaking, they're not written on papyrus or parchment, right? Because those we know from the Dead Sea Scrolls, which are 5 during the time of Jesus, that those, are rare. It's rare to find scrolls that survived. Now there are texts though, and we've they're in the Israel Museum. There's the texts that were written on silver, those amulets that we found, the earliest quotes from the Bible from
Copper too, right?
there's copper, but that's the Dead Sea Scrolls, but they do have copper scrolls, but the ones you're talking about were Dead Sea Scrolls. But they also, of course, had a lot of clay, right? They have clay, and they have seals, and they have documents that were written on clay, that they would write them on clay when it was wet, and then they would. So the earliest writing we have, the earliest writing of like texts that we see are the Sumerians from Babylonia, right? So writing was already there, but we just don't know how many people could read. But I will tell you, and we read elsewhere in the Bible, and again, interestingly, maybe by Jeremiah and Baruch's own circle of people, we read this very famous line from Deuteronomy that we just read a couple of weeks ago, right? In the Shema Ve'ahavta, it says, impress them on your children, recite them on it when you're at home and when you're away. Okay, well, you don't need to be literate for that necessarily, but it says, bind them as a sign in your hand and let them be a symbol on your forehead. Inscribe them on the doorposts of your homes and on your gates. Now, that tells us that people read. Why? Because it doesn't say the priest should do it. It doesn't say that, the king will do it. It says everybody does it. Now, okay, not everybody then would still have to be literate in order for that. But why would it be there unless there is an assumption that a lot of people read?
Yeah, they didn't have those at the time.
Yes, all the other stuff you could say you don't need to read for, but that does. So there are other parts of the Bible where it says to read these things, and so that, but maybe that applies to the king, or maybe it applies to the priest. But this is a line for everybody. So why would you inscribe them if you can't read them? It doesn't make any sense.
You don't have to be literate to read a stop sign.
Well, that's true, because they make it a color and a shape.
Because they may not, when I was 3 or 4, I could tell you that a stop was STOP, but I couldn't read.
Correct, but there wouldn't be. This isn't even a
But
necessary.
because everybody's got the same thing up on their house. It's kind of like a yard sign, it seems to me.
Could be, other than the fact that we believe that when it says inscribe them on the doorposts of your homes, what are they actually talking about, Rosemary? Inscribe what?
Well, we have in it's a Ve'ahavta prayer, right? In the
Well, that's what we have today. But
right.
we don't
What
believe
did they
that
have?
we don't believe that's actually the case. It doesn't really make sense that the Ve'ahavta says to write the Ve'ahavta on it. Right? It doesn't make sense. I don't think it makes sense. I mean, we do that because that's what we've been doing for a long time. Right? But I will say, and for those who were with us on Wednesdays,
Do we have any of those doorpost thingies? If everybody had one on their house, seems to me there should still be some.
okay, so when it says this, well, from 2,600 years ago, no, because we don't have any buildings that are intact in Israel from 2,600 years ago. So that's somewhat problematic. But when this happens in chapter 6, right? This is chapter 6 of Deuteronomy. Chapter 6 of Deuteronomy is there. But look what comes right before it in chapter 4. And don't give it away if you were here a couple weeks ago on Wednesday night. Look at what's in chapter 4. And so what's there?
The 10 Commandments.
Uh-huh. So chapter 4 is the 10 Commandments, and here it is right here. Well, you've got.
I wonder, that, there's a movement now, that people want to put the Ten Commandments up.
Why?
in
Because the
places.
Bible,
It doesn't necessarily mean they want people to read them.
yeah, because the Bible pretty much tells us that the
Uh-huh.
10 Commandments were what they had. Here they
Right.
are, right here. You shall have no other gods besides me.
Uh-huh.
You shall not, this is, the famous second version of the 10 Commandments, which is almost the same as the first. We talked about one of the differences that it says Shamor at Yom HaShabbat instead of Zachor at Yom HaShabbat. Remember the seventh day, but of course, the rabbis came up with a reason, but there it is. You shall not murder, you shall not commit adultery, et cetera, et cetera. And there it is, and it finishes right here. Don't covet your neighbor's wife, et cetera. God spoke those words and no more to your whole congregation, right? And then literally 10 verses later, it says, take to heart these instructions which I charge you this day.
I
And press
see.
on. It seems as though they're talking about the 10 Commandments.
Mhm.
Now, we've talked about it before and we talked about it then. Why did it stop being the 10 Commandments? Because by the rabbinic period, by the time of around Jesus, people were saying it's not just the 10 Commandments. Our covenant, our laws are not just the 10 Commandments. So stop getting people to only focus on the 10 Commandments. But as a set of 10 Commandments, a easy code and covenant for people to remember, or easier than the rest of the Bible, it seems as though that's what they're talking about.
Mhm.
And that's why when we talk about people putting it on public spaces today, it's from that intention, and it seems like, oh yeah, these are pretty big deals. But that's what we get from Deuteronomy. And what's interesting about it is that we believe that Deuteronomy was written by, well, I say so we believe, scholars believe, modern scholars believe that Deuteronomy was written by Josiah's inner circle, which if it didn't include Jeremiah and it didn't include Baruch, it most assuredly would have been their parents. So these people who are walking around saying, hey, let's dictate these things, let's write these things down, or maybe the very same people who are saying, inscribe them on the doorposts of your homes, which are scribes and people who want to make sure people are following the rules. Yeah, John, you were going to say something.
I just, I remember something about one was written, and I'm thinking, I remember something in the Old Testament about one language, so I went all the way back to Genesis 11, right?
Uh-huh.
Going back to.
Loves that.
Listen,
Uh-huh.
you don't know where you're going to, you know where you've been, right?
Right.
And I can't, they all were one language. There was a history here. I can't imagine they weren't writing. They found silver and gold, but there wasn't something being written to document just living.
So to build on what John says, the text in Genesis seem to imply, and again, we would say that Genesis was probably written by different people that wrote Deuteronomy. But what's interesting about that, no matter what, is that at least by the time the people were reading Deuteronomy or writing Deuteronomy, or by the time of Jeremiah, people believed that language had been around for a long time. It was not a new thing. And it wasn't, because the Sumerians have been writing for 2,000 years. So it wasn't a new thing. Egyptians had started with hieroglyphics. And even if you're saying that's not something that, it's not the same kind of stuff, it definitely is. It definitely is, again, something that people now know, that language can be passed down, and it can be passed down through traditions of writing and traditions of reading. Now, I want to show you one thing quickly with this before we get into Baruch too much. So Baruch, as we read last week, was the scribe who wrote this stuff down for Jeremiah. That's what the Bible says. What's really interesting about this guy, Baruch, is that, again, he lives during.
He lived a long time, it looks like, too.
Well, yeah, I mean, he seemed to have lived around the time, again, of Jeremiah, right? Length of time. But here's the really interesting thing about Baruch. In 1975, a clay bulla, which is right over here, it's a clay seal. With writing. But again, writing from that period, which is more likely to survive because it's written on clay and not on parchment. appeared in the antiquities market. Its purchaser, a prominent Israeli collector, permitted Israeli archaeologist Nachman Avigad to publish the bulla. Although its source is not definitively known, it has been identified as coming from the burnt house excavated by Yigal Shiloh. The bulla is now in the Israel Museum, and there it is, and is stamped with an oval seal. The inscription, written in ancient Hebrew alphabet, reads, belonging to Brachayahu, which is Baruch, son of Neriyahu, the scribe.
Wow.
That's his seal. It has his name, it has his last name, and it says he's the scribe.
Do we know how long?
Wait, in 1996, a second bulla emerged with an identical inscription, presumably stamped with the same seal. This bulla was also imprinted with a fingerprint. And some people, including Herschel Shanks, who used to own the Biblical Archaeology Review, BAR, speculated the fingerprint might be that of Baruch himself.
DNA still. we-
Yes, yes.
And this, to me, supports my request
Yeah,
for in-depth Torah studies on the ground.
okay. In Israel. He wants it in Israel. Well, it is something to think about. Now,
Do you carbon date that at all?
what?
You know if they carbon date?
Yeah, and it's been carbon dated. The problem is the problem and why even people can argue against it is because they were found not in situ and not in there where they were not uncovered by teams of archaeologists.
If you carbon dated then. it
Okay,
dates back.
but the problem is the reason that they weren't, and everyone knows this, is because for the most part, they've been excavated from, I don't want to say this in a politically correct way. On the Temple Mount in Jerusalem, the area is controlled by the area on the top of the Temple Mount is controlled by the Waqf, by the Jordanian religious Muslim authority. And Israelis are not allowed. I mean, they go up there, but they're supposed to be permission to go up there, et cetera. So the excavations there, anything that's being dug there is not being dug under Israeli authority. Generally speaking, what's happening is that stuff is being tossed out in dumps, and Israeli archaeologists are going through the dump and occasionally finding stuff. But there is stuff that's being sold on the antiquities market by the people who are digging this stuff. It's very political, obviously, because there is this question of, the Palestinians are not interested in asserting by history the Jewish presence on the Temple Mount, right? So, or that Jews were there. So some of the stuff is getting out, but there's a real question of what's not getting out, what's being held, and what we never see. So that's a problem, and that we don't know. We have no idea. These bulla come out, but we don't know what else has been found. We really don't. And it's not been scientifically studied. It hasn't been scientifically mapped out where it was found. So we'll never know. And people will always dispute it, and we just don't know. But that's very problematic. And so it's not a good situation. But the political situation is not a good situation. So it's not like people are focusing on the fact that archaeological evidence is being obliterated. That's that's so far below the obvious issues of people dying right now that I'm not gonna say that that's as important. But that's why these things can be disputed. This is why this is a reality. Okay. So I was in college with this guy. I studied with Richard Elliott Friedman, who wrote the book, who wrote the Bible. And he put forward the claim that the Deuteronomist, who is generally thought to have either written or edited the books of Deuteronomy all the way through to Kings, was Baruch ben Neriah. He defended this assertion by comparing the number of different phrases in the book of Jeremiah with phrases in other books. Some reject this claim on the grounds that it goes beyond the evidence. Well, the problem of going beyond the evidence is there is no evidence. But what's interesting about it is this idea that he has that Baruch might be the most important person in the Bible, who's actually mentioned in the Bible, who we actually have evidence for. In 1996, this second bulla wasn't found, hadn't been found yet. So when I studied with him, it was still somewhat like strange that he was talking about Baruch and no one really knew much about it. Now it's not so crazy anymore. And I will say this, the fact that we found evidence for this guy is more evidence for him is pretty amazing. So again, according to who wrote the Bible, Baruch is the key to pretty much the Bible. And that's Deuteronomy all the way through 2 Kings. I believe it. I do believe it. I believe that Baruch or somebody in that circle were the people or the person who wrote this.
Could you pull the picture over so we can see the photo?
No,
Oh, yeah.
can you fake carbon dating?
No, you can't fake it. The evidence is there or it's not. So anything that has carbon in it, they can see the radioactivity of it and know how it's how old it is roughly. So there you go.
Oh, so you can never lie about your age.
If you're carbon dated, well, you could, because for you it would be about 100 years. So you couldn't.
Well,
Could-
for Mary, it'd be 150.
Yeah. Now we don't know much about Baruch, this guy. Look, there's a statue of him. But what's really cool about the rabbis is actually they like the guy. I mean, everybody likes Baruch. I mean, he's Jeremiah's right-hand man. He's faithful, right? He's a faithful helper. So some say he's a blood relative of Jeremiah. According to rabbinic literature, which means the Midrash, both Baruch and Jeremiah, being Kohanim and descendants of the proselyte Rahab, served as a humiliating example to their contemporaries, as much as they belong to the few who hearken to the word of God. Another Midrash regarded Baruch as identical with the Ethiopian Ebed Melech, who rescued Jeremiah from a dungeon, which we haven't gotten to yet, and states that he received the appellation Baruch because of his piety.
Why do they call Rahab a proselyte?
Well, she's a convert, but she's also
She's a
she's a
prostitute.
prostitute and a proselyte. She's both. She's a prostitute proselyte. Yes.
Right, proselyte.
Yes. According to the book of Joshua, she's the one who lets the spies into her home, into her house of ill repute, and protects them because she knows that they're working for God. And so according to tradition, and she asks to be blessed, she asks to be saved. Well, according to tradition, they not only was her family saved, but they become really important people. So there's really an interesting midrash about Rahab all throughout the Bible, which is that so-and-so was a descendant of Rahab. You'd think it would be, obviously something that someone would be proud of, but you should be proud of being a descendant of Rahab. Anyways, this other one about Ebed Melech was a tough one because, again, because of the color of his skin, different traditions about Baruch. But what's interesting about this guy is that we've actually found evidence that he existed. And we can actually look at something that if he didn't write his own seal, he definitely has a seal that might have been the seal that was sealed on these books that we're talking about. So when it says that he wrote down a scroll at Jeremiah's dictation, maybe on that scroll was that seal. So again, the seal, he would take it, press it on the wax, and that was the stamp. That's the amazing thing, that maybe we found that thing. So what we read last week is that he writes down the scroll, and as we remembered, they take the scroll, they read it, and what do they do? Of course, the officials said, go into hiding, you and Jeremiah, don't let a soul know where you were. And the king took the scroll and they burned it up. They cut it up with a scroll, with his knife, and they threw it in the fire until the entire scroll was consumed by fire. The king and all his courtiers heard these words, and they showed no fear and did not tear their garments. So that's what we finished with last time. The fact that it scares the king. But of course, Jeremiah got another scroll and gave it to the scribe. And at Jeremiah's dictation, he wrote the whole text of the scroll that the king had burned. And more of the like was added, which is assumedly what we're reading right now. So,
So we think some people think it's Jeremiah, it's Deuteronomy.
well, not that book, but that another book, that was written around that time was Deuteronomy. No, what was burned was that prophecy that scared him, what we just read. So it's basically saying he tried to burn the evidence. It didn't matter. He created more. So now we're going to skip ahead because that text said it came from Jehoiakim. Now we're reading about what happened during the time of Zedekiah. And again, this is, 10, 15 years later that this is happening. So, and again, in between Jehoiakim, you also have this guy, King Coniah or Jeconiah, who was Jehoiakim's son. And then after that, Coniah's uncle, Zedekiah, also known as Jehoiakim's brother, is made king. And he's actually the third son of Josiah that's king. There was the other son, Jehoahaz, who was king for like a minute, literally like a minute, and then he gets deposed too. So 3 sons of Josiah are king, and 1 grandson is king in these last 15 years before the destruction. And Zedekiah is the last. He's the one, Tzidkiyahu is the one who's there for the end. So here's what happens in one of those. So we skipped back to Jehoiakim, and now we skip back to Zedekiah. So as I said, it does not follow in any linear fashion. To use the analogy that I've used the last few weeks, it's very much like Oppenheimer. Which story am I in? Am I in the story right before they get destroyed, or have we gone back 15 years to before they're going to get destroyed? That's what's weird about this, is it's very nonlinear. All right, so let's read, Rosemary, if you take us through chapter 37.
Zedekiah, son of Josiah, became king instead of Coniah, son of Jehoiakim, for King Nebuchadnezzar of Babylon set him up as king over the land of Judah.
Yeah, so it tells us, again, to be reminded that even though Nebuchadnezzar hasn't destroyed the temple yet, he's still calling the shots. He's still deciding who's king of Judah. So Nebuchadnezzar, the point of this, that I'm telling you this, is that the temple didn't have to be destroyed to some extent. If the Jewish people the Judeans had been okay with, living as good vassals to Nebuchadnezzar, which is what Jeremiah is telling them to do, the temple didn't have to be destroyed. So what Jeremiah is asking them to do is just stay with the program. Be good subjects to Nebuchadnezzar. We can't beat him. How do we know that could have happened? Because it was happening. It was happening. And there's a group that keeps agitating against them. And of course, we see this, and we have a very well documented situation of what happened during the Roman period. The Romans didn't want to destroy Jerusalem necessarily. That wasn't their plan. They didn't come in there and go, hey, we got to destroy Jerusalem. They didn't want that. That just creates chaos and more problems. They didn't want that. They had eventually, they had no choice. And again, according to Josephus and according to the Romans and according to the rabbis, the Jews burned down the temple themselves. The Romans didn't destroy they're responsible for it because they were causing these problems, but the Jews burnt it down. It didn't have to be burned down even. It wasn't like the Romans came in there and said, let's burn the temple today. The Jews did it. Everybody says so. We said it. It wasn't just the Romans said it. We said it. All right. So could have been avoided maybe, and maybe this could have been avoided. Here we go.
Neither he nor his courtiers, nor the people of the land gave heed to the words that God spoke through the prophet Jeremiah. Yet King Zedekiah sent Yehukal, son of Shelemiah, and Zephaniah, son of the priest Maaseiah, to the prophet Jeremiah to say, please pray on our behalf to the eternal our God.
They can see the kings still believe that Jeremiah has power, but they're not doing what Jeremiah is telling them to do. They're not giving heed to Jeremiah. But they still want Jeremiah. They still want Jeremiah to intercede for them.
Jeremiah could still go in and out among the people, for they had not yet put him in prison. The army of Pharaoh had set out from Egypt, and when the Chaldeans, who were besieging Jerusalem, heard the report, they raised the siege of Jerusalem.
That's a lot of stuff. First of all, the reason it's in parentheses is because we've read that Jeremiah was in prison, but now they've gone back to a point where Jeremiah isn't in prison. And so they had to tell us he's not in prison yet, so he can kind of do what he can do these kind of things. It also tells us that the Egyptians are waging war against the Babylonians, and that's part of the problem. There were Jews, including Zedekiah, who are hoping that the Egyptians will come to their aid, that the Egyptians will get the Babylonians off of their back, right? So that's where they get this belief from. It's not even that they believe that God's going to help them. Maybe God will help us, as God's helped us, before, like against the Assyrians, against the Egyptians. There's actually a chance that the Egyptians could actually militarily engage the Babylonians and defeat them. So there's a reason to believe it. It's not like they were crazy. It's not like the people said, well, I don't care. No, they cared, and they had an answer. Zedekiah and his people said the answer is Egypt. Jeremiah is telling them they're idiots, but don't rely on the Egyptians. And that's why, again, Jeremiah reminds people over and over again, the Egyptians cannot be counted on. And don't look to Egypt.
What does the word raised mean?
Well, that's literally the translation, that they lifted.
Stop.
Yeah. They took up, they got up. I don't know. Mary, what's your translation say? Yeah. That's the intent of that. Yeah.
It means they called it off.
Yeah, they had to deal with the Egyptians. So they stopped the siege of Jerusalem and went off and fought the Egyptians, which of course the Jews like, right? That's good news. Temporary good news, but it's good news. Yeah.
Then the word of God came to the prophet Jeremiah. Thus said the Eternal, the God of Israel, thus shall you say to the king of Judah, who sent you to me to inquire of me, the army of Pharaoh, which set out to help you, will return to its own land, to Egypt. And the Chaldeans will come back and attack this city, and they will capture it and destroy it by fire.
Yeah, so this is not, you think it's good news, but it's not good news.
Thus said God, do not delude yourselves into thinking the Chaldeans will go away from us. They will not. Even if you defeated the whole army of the Chaldeans that are fighting against you, and only wounded men were left lying in their tents, they would get up and burn this city down. When the army of the Chaldeans raised the siege of Jerusalem on account of the army of Pharaoh, Jeremiah was going to leave Jerusalem and go to the territory of Benjamin to share in some property there among the people. When he got to the Benjamin gate, there was a guard officer there named Uriah, son of Shelemiah, son of Hananiah, and he arrested the prophet Jeremiah, saying, you are defecting to the Chaldeans.
So just, again, it's pretty clear, but let me just make sure you understand. So the siege was going on. It broke for a while. Jeremiah wants to leave, and the Judean soldier there, the guard that was there, arrested him because he said he wasn't going. We're told he's going to visit the territory of Benjamin where he has property, and they say no, you're going over to the Babylonians, and so they arrested him. They arrested him for again being a deserter or going off to the other side. Yeah.
I'm gonna open this door, so there's a cute little bird right there.
Oh, yeah.
Jewish bird.
We've been waiting for it to depart, Marcia. Yep.
Jeremiah answered, "That's a lie. I'm not defecting to the Chaldeans." But Uriah would not listen to him. He arrested Jeremiah and brought him to the officials. The officials were furious with Jeremiah. They beat him and put him into prison in the house of the scribe Jonathan, for it had been made into a jail.
Yeah. So they arrested him, and it also says here that they beat him. They hit him, they beat him. So they actually didn't just arrest him, they beat him. And it says that they put him in the house of the scribe Jonathan, right? Another scribe, Yehonatan. We don't know who Yehonatan was. We don't know whether he's a royal scribe or he's a scribe that, just works for other people, other officials. Doesn't say. We don't really know who he is. But it says that his house had been turned into a jail. Now, for us, that seems strange because we don't usually just turn a building into a jail. But as I told you before, they didn't have jails. They had people under house arrest. They had people who were kept in the army barracks so that the soldiers could watch over the guy and make sure he didn't go out. And as we said, the early jails that we had, even in this country, were the police stations, or the sheriff's stations, the sheriff's offices, because that's who was in charge of the jail. Every time you see a Western movie where, you got the sheriff sitting there watching the prisoners, it's because that was the prison. There were no jails. There were no buildings other than that little cell that they had in the sheriff's office. So that's true. So they kept him in this house, which they had turned into a jail for the purposes of maybe just keeping Jeremiah in that jail. So here's what it says. And again, let's read what happens here.
Thus Jeremiah came to the pit and the cells, and Jeremiah remained there a long time. Then King Zedekiah sent for him, and the king questioned him secretly in his palace. He asked, "Is there any word from God?" "There is," Jeremiah answered, and he continued, "You will be delivered into the hands of the king of Babylon."
Not what Zedekiah wanted to hear. So he's in prison, and it describes it here as being a dungeon, being a pit. So that's not just a person's house, right? That means that he was in something that what does it say here? Meaning of the Hebrew uncertain, but again, we translate this word bore. A bore is a pit or a hole. Now, is it physically like a pit? Is it a dungeon? Is it something dug in the, it usually is, which is why they translate it as a dungeon. That's probably your translation, right?
They maybe chose the house as a prison because it already had a cellar.
Could have been, exactly, but it could have been a cellar. So the idea of it being, and that's why they put here the note, it's uncertain. Mary, what does yours say? Dungeon? Yeah. So there's a sense that it's definitely a hole in the ground. It's something that you wouldn't want to be in because assumedly it's dark and dank and not a place it's not like just sitting in someone's bed in their house. So they're under guard, they're under watch, but it also seems to be he's in a pit. Now,
And
a
probably
bore
had a
can-
lock so that people wouldn't steal whatever you had stored in your cellar.
Correct. So he could have literally been kept in someone's basement, essentially. I want to make it clear that that's why the Hebrew's uncertain, because in those days, and we do know because we do have examples of these cells, of these cellars, is that and the word cellar and cell come from the same root in English, that these were places where people would keep supplies that they wanted to keep in a climate controlled, as much refrigeration as they could have, because it's a little colder down there. But they also sometimes created, if you were wealthy enough, that you had your own cistern, and a bore could also be a cistern. It could also be a well, essentially, that you create, and you put plaster around it. It's not a spring. It doesn't have any source that fills it up. It's not connected to an aquifer, but you put water in it, and that's your water storage. So it's not a good situation. I'm not saying, but it's not necessarily that he was like in a dungeon that, like, your image from, the Middle Ages or something like that. But it's not a good thing. I'm not saying it's a good thing, but it also could be he's being kept in someone's basement. It's not good. It's definitely not good. And it's undeserved, because all he's doing is just telling them what God is telling him. And Zedekiah believes it, because Zedekiah keeps asking him for word. He wants to know what's really happening. He does believe that Jeremiah is speaking on behalf of God. He says to him, is there any word from God? That means he knows that God's speaking to him. Why is he doing this to him? Well, because he's revolting against the Babylonians. He doesn't need Jeremiah to get the people all freaked out. It goes against it's going against his plan. It's going against Zedekiah's plan. Zedekiah is trying to hold out against the Babylonians. It only works if his political opponents are arrested and jailed and put away. That's it. But he knows that Jeremiah is speaking on behalf of God. So he's stuck, which means that probably that Zedekiah knew that what he was doing was wrong, but he has no choice. He has no choice. The people, his courtiers, his advisors are telling him to rebel against the Babylonians. They're feeding him that information. He's acting on it. He feels compelled to do it. Maybe he's worried that they're going to kill him if he doesn't go along with it. His own people will kill him. So he's really in a bad situation, Zedekiah. I'm not defending him. I'm just trying to give you what seems to be really going on for him, because he believes that Jeremiah is speaking the word of God.
And Jeremiah said to King Zedekiah, what wrong have I done to you, to your courtiers, and to this people, that you have put me in jail? And where are those prophets of yours who prophesied to you that the king of Babylon would never move against you and against this land? Now, please hear me, O Lord King, and grant my plea. Don't send me back to the house of the scribe Jonathan to die there. So King Zedekiah gave instruction to lodge Jeremiah in the prison compound, and to supply him daily with a loaf of bread from the baker's street. Until all the bread in the city was gone, Jeremiah remained in the prison compound.
Wow. So he's being kept in jail. He's under house arrest, whatever, in the prison. But he's now going to get bread. And of course, what that means is that the city, which already doesn't have a lot of bread, and the bread is going to be gone, he's being fed while other people are also trying to figure out how to live. This is insane. He's being kept in jail as the city is falling apart. But yet Zedekiah is keeping him there.
Is he waiting for Jeremiah to lie and say everything's great and you're going to win this? And
Well, that's the question of whether, if Jeremiah would say that, whether he would get out.
keeping him there puts that much pressure on him.
But Jeremiah won't do it. And so what's so interesting about this, and what's so different about every other Jeremiah and every other prophet, is we never read this information about any other prophet. We read that Elijah, for example, is being chased by King Ahab and Queen Jezebel. They're trying to kill him. But we don't get this kind of detail about it. How do you read this without thinking, this is the report of something that actually happened? There is no sense in this at all. And again, I guess anything is possible, that this is being made up. First of all, who would make this up? What's the purpose of making this up? This doesn't serve anybody's purpose. It doesn't help anybody to make this up. And
the Jonathan referred to?
We don't know. We don't know who the scribe is. He's another scribe. Assumedly, he's part of the inner circle, but we really don't know. I mean, he could have been just a scribe. He could have been a scribe working for the courtiers. He could have been an ordinary scribe. Seems like he's part of the inner circle, so it seems like that's who he is. But there's something about this which is amazing, because we know that people do this. They maintain these kinds of crazy fantasies of what they're going to do while their own stuff is falling apart.
Yes.
We have it documented. We have it documented in the last few years. That's the crazy thing. Is like, there's nothing's changed. Nothing has changed. People do this today, and they do it for everybody to see, and it's not being hidden. So people do this kind of stuff, and they still do. I don't think there's anything here that's not only true, believable, a fact. It seems like it really happened. And
They're telling him he's going to lose power and he doesn't want to believe it.
yes,
He said there's really no moral to this, so it's like it has to.
it has to have happened. The whole sequence of the way this falls out, of him being arrested, of him being thrown back in prison, of all the stuff that Jeremiah is recounting on the backdrop of these kings being turned over.
Genesis is about moral, so we don't really know it.
Exactly. And some of the stuff in Genesis definitely seems more mythological, or again, it seems more like it's telling us a bigger story, a bigger lesson. This is just, I mean,
There's no point to it.
It's like a story, it's like.
and it is just a reportage. It's literally telling us what's happening, the level of detail here. And again, the level of detail is down to the people with their last names. Some of these people, we've also found scrolls from these, or bula, I should say, carvings with their names on them. Yeah.
Shephatiah, son of Matan, Gedaliah, son of Pashur, Hukal, son of Shelemiah, and Pashur, son of Malchiah, heard what Jeremiah was saying to all the people. Thus said God, whoever remains in this city shall die by the sword, by famine, and by pestilence. But whoever surrenders to the Chaldeans shall live. He shall at least gain his life and shall live. Thus said God, this city shall be delivered into the hands of the king of Babylon's army, and he shall capture it.
Yeah. So the king's people are hearing this stuff.
Both Chaldeans and Babylon.
Yeah, because Babylonia, the people, when they refer to the people, they don't call them Babylonians. They call the city Bavel. They call the capital Babylon, but they don't call the people Babylonians. And the word that they use for them, Kasdim, is used throughout the Bible. It's even used in Genesis, because it says that Abraham is Avram from Ur Kasdim, from Ur of the Chaldeans, which is the city of the Chaldeans. So we know these Kasdim, we know them, as the people of Mesopotamia. So, yeah. So he's telling people, you got to surrender to the Babylonians, which you can imagine is not making the court very happy.
Then the officials said to the king, let that man be put to death, for he disheartens the soldiers and all the people who are left in this city by speaking such things to them. That man is not seeking the welfare of this people, but their harm. King Zedekiah replied, he is in your hands. The king cannot oppose you in anything.
Well, that pretty much tells us that King Zedekiah does not feel like he can stand up to the people, to his courtiers, right? The king cannot oppose you in anything. Well, he could. He doesn't want to. He can't. He doesn't feel like he can. Theoretically, he could. He's not going to, because King Zedekiah is a weak king who goes along with his people. And we did read in Kings what happens to King Zedekiah. And we'll remind you too when we come to the end of this. But this is what is happening while this siege is going on. Yeah.
It's interesting, I have no idea, Mary is saying his mind, but, the words are totally different in this, in mine.
Does it? What does yours say?
Therefore, the princes, right?
Mhm.
You said officials,
Yeah.
princes said unto the king, we beseech thee, let this man be put to death. For thus he weakens the hands of the men of war. Right?
Mhm.
Those are pretty powerful words. For his word.
Yeah, so your translation's a little bit more literal than this translation. This translation translates the men of war as soldiers, right? So men of war, but I'm not that, I mean, that's kind of the same thing.
You said so.
Yeah.
I mean,
Yeah. He disheartens the soldiers. Now, the question of translating the first word is sarim, which are translated as princes or officials. The word sar is oftentimes translated as prince. Right? So that's not a bad translation. It just assumes that Zedekiah is only hearing from royal people, the royal family. And there seems to be, it seems to be that these are not just literally princes or people of the royal family, that it's officials. The word kind of goes, what is yours, Mary? What does yours say? Princes, yeah.
what officials would it be? They didn't have.
Well, they had scribes, he had treasurers, he had courtiers. It's a little different word than courtiers, which is why they chose that, why some translations chose that. Let me just see if like any of the traditional commentaries on no. Rashi just translated it from Old French, the word lacher. No, there's no real commentary from the Middle Ages on it, but Sar is usually translated as prince. So it's usually translated as princes. But again, the feeling that these translators had was that it's not the royal family that cares. It's all the people that are, in the court, and which is why they translated it as officials and not courtiers, but people who are in power, people who were going along or encouraging the king to revolt against them. Again, the people who are saying the Egyptians are going to come to our side and help us out, or that God's going to help us out, that there's no way the Babylonians can keep this up. So again, what they're saying is true from the standpoint of having Jeremiah run around and telling people, you got to give up. That's not going to make the soldiers feel like they want to fight. So they're not wrong. I mean, they are wrong, but their logic is sound. Their logic is correct. Don't let this guy out of prison. Kill him. Don't let this guy continue, because he's messing up. He's counteracting everything you're doing. We're trying to do. And the king says, fine, do whatever you want with him. I can't oppose you. He could oppose him. He doesn't want to, or he can't. But he said, I'm not going to. I'm not going to do anything. I can't do it. He actually says, I can't. That's what it says. That's why the translation is, I can't. So what do they do?
So they took Jeremiah and put him down in the pit of Malchiah, the king's son, which was in the prison compound. They let Jeremiah down by ropes. There was no water in the pit, only mud, and Jeremiah sank into the mud.
Yeah, so this is a different prison that he's put in, to a different, and again, the translation is, again, a bore, a pit. Again, this one seems like it had water in it at one point, because now there's only mud.
You said it's not fed, like.
Nope. It's a hole in the ground, and now he's sitting in mud, and he sinks into the mud. Yep.
Ebed-Melech the Cushite, a eunuch who was in the king's palace, heard that they had put Jeremiah in the pit. The king was then sitting at the Benjamin gate. So Ebed-Melech left the king's palace and spoke to the king. O Lord King, Those men have acted wickedly in all they did to the prophet Jeremiah. They have put him down in the pit to die there of hunger, for there was no more bread in the city.
Well, that makes sense. He's going to die. There's no bread anybody has. He's definitely not going to get bread in there.
Then the king instructed Ebed-melech the Cushite, take with you 30 men from here and pull the prophet Jeremiah up from the pit before he dies.
Okay. So Zedekiah it says rescue him. So when the princes or the officials come and tell Zedekiah, you got to kill him or get rid of him, he says, do with him what you want. When the eunuch comes to him and says, save him, he saves him. It shows you that he doesn't really want to hurt Jeremiah. And now he's given a opportunity to save him. Now, as we read the thing about Baruch, somehow Baruch and Ebed-melech are the same person, which seems a little weird, but they just don't like the fact that we have this guy named Ebed-melech who we don't know anything about. And there's so much weirdness in this one line that we have to just address the weirdness here. So much. First of all, it says he's a Cushite, which they translated as Ethiopian. Not here. Here they just use the word Cush. Your volume probably says Ethiopian, right? Yeah. So the understanding is that he's from Ethiopia, or he's from Cush, the land of Cush, which means he's black.
The detail is just incredible.
Yeah. So he's black. He's black. And he's a eunuch. He's Ish Saris, which means he's Saris. He is without, yes, the equipment. He is a courtier, and there's a lot going on there. So first of all, what is the king of Judah doing with the eunuch as an official? It says he's in the king's palace, by the way, too. So he's the hero of the story, by the way, obviously. That goes without saying. He's the hero. Now, a lot of people, including the rabbis, said he's the least likely hero, right? This is not the guy who you would have expected to step up and be the hero. An Ethiopian eunuch. So he had 2 strikes against him, according to the Bible, to some extent, according to the way the rabbis perceived it. Because he's a Hamite. He's a descendant of Ham. The Cushites are 100% like the Egyptians. They're from the cursed peoples. They're from people who could be slaves. They could be eunuchs. There's so much going on here in the story that, again, who is this guy? How can this guy be the hero? This is, and was this a thing? What were Ethiopian eunuchs a thing? What was this a thing? Well, yeah, it was a thing, because here's another story about an Ethiopian eunuch. Right here, there's a story of the baptism of the Ethiopian eunuch. So in Christian tradition, there is a story of, again, here it calls, I'll show you the actual story. Whoa, let me go back to that, the Christian Bible. Let me just see, it's not the, let me just see if I can get, that's not where it first, that's just another place where it says it. That's not the story of it. It's in Acts 8, chapter 8. So, well, that's a picture of it. Let me actually show you. Well, Reverend Lynn, you have Acts 8. So do you, Mary, and you have, here, I'm gonna pop it up on the screen so everyone can see it. Here we go. So Let's take a look. An angel says to Philip, go south to the road, starts from Jerusalem down to Gaza. So start on the road. And on the way, he met an Ethiopian eunuch, an important official in charge of all the treasury of the Kandake, which means the queen of the Ethiopians. This man had gone to Jerusalem to worship, and on his way home was sitting in his chariot reading the book of Isaiah. And the Spirit told Philip, go to that chariot and stay near it. And Philip ran up to the chariot and heard the man reading Isaiah. And he said, do you understand what you're reading? And Philip said, how can I? Unless someone explains it to me. So he invited Philip to come with him. And he was reading a text from Isaiah. Right? And the eunuch asked Philip, tell me, please, who is this prophet talking about, himself or someone else? And Philip began with that very passage of scripture and told him the good news of Jesus. And they came along the water, they came to some water, and the eunuch said, look, here's water. What can stand in the way of me being baptized? And he gave orders to stop the chariot. Then both Philip and the eunuch went down to the water, and Philip baptized him. So they went down to Ashdod, they traveled about Azotus, and then they went to Caesarea. Ethiopian eunuch. 600 years later, people are still talking about Ethiopian eunuchs. They're important. They were seen as maybe trusted. They were seen as a thing to have. And so you can see these themes pop up later on. And so when you look at this story, you realize that that motif is going to be then important for Christians later on. And that Ethiopian eunuch becomes one of the first non-Israelites who converts, becomes a Christian. So for Christians, that story is super important because it seems to show that non-Israelites, non-Jews can become Christians. Because up until that point, there's still a question, can they? Do they have to be followers of Judaism? Now, here's a guy who's so clearly not within the realm of what you'd expect. Well, that's also what's happening, obviously, here in the story of Jeremiah. What's interesting, of course, is there seems to be this understanding, at least in the book of Acts, that this Ethiopian eunuch was already learning Judaism. He's already reading Isaiah. He's going to pray. But
Don't they call him an Ethiopian Jew?
exactly. So that's an interesting thing. Was he Jewish? But then there's the question, well, then how was he allowed to be a eunuch?
And how is he allowed to baptize?
Well, if he's a Jew, then he's not really, then it's not really an issue. But it also shows you, again, one of the first people that gets baptized is this guy. Well, all I'm telling you is this is a motif and it's not a coincidence. There's no way that the version in Acts is a coincidence when you see this character that appears as the hero of Jeremiah's story. And so this guy is very heroic in Jeremiah's story because everyone else was against Jeremiah in the court, and then this guy steps up and does it. Now, again, he has the king on his side. The king agrees to it, but it took a lot of courage for this guy to do it. And again, the role of eunuchs in the Bible, in the Hebrew Bible, and then later in the Christian Bible is an interesting one because, again, you were not supposed to do that. According to Jewish tradition, that was not okay. People were not supposed to do that.
So I'm still a little confused. Is he a Jew or he's not? He's a Christian.
In the story of Acts, he becomes a Christian.
So
We're not sure whether he was really Jewish in the first place or just learning about Judaism. I tend to think he was learning about Judaism. He wasn't necessarily Jewish. This guy in the king's palace, we don't even know whether he was a follower of God. But what we do know is that he's the hero of the story because he says to the king, you can't let this happen. And he's right. And he's the hero of the story. And so he goes and
was he one of the first Ethiopians then?
in the Bible?
Yeah.
No, he's one of the first. Yeah, I mean, he's not, there's one of a few that's called out as a Cushite. Again, in Hebrew today, the word Cushi is someone who's black. So to this day in Israel, If you say Cushi, you're talking about someone who's black. It's a black person. Can it be derogatory?
Today, you're using, it. Or is it just descriptive?
It's, I think it's always the question of whether describing someone by skin color is considered derogatory or not. So generally speaking, that's I don't even know what to say. I'm honest. I don't know what to say because
It's changed so much, that's what I'm asking.
there are people in Israel who feel to this now in this time that you're not supposed to use the word Kushi.
So I walked into a store not too long ago and I couldn't remember the name of the person. And I said, you have to excuse me for saying this, but the only way I can describe her to you is to tell you she's wearing a hijab. And they weren't offended, but that could be offensive. But that was the only way I can describe. So
I guess.
that would be what I would think of here. If you're saying,
Now, originally, it described a country, so I wouldn't think it was necessarily a problem, but today it's used as a word to describe everybody who's black. So again, it would have been Ethiopia. It is true to call it Ethiopia, which is why a translation in your Bible, Mary, says Ethiopian, right? Yours says Ethiopian, just geographically correct. But if you were translating this to some extent today, you could say the person you might say an African guy, or it could be a black guy. But Ethiopian is definitely where he was. I mean, that's where originally it comes from. So he's the one who saves him. Here's what it says.
So Ebed-Melech took the men with him and went to the king's palace, to a place below the treasury. There they got worn cloths and rags, which they let down to Jeremiah in the pit by ropes. And Ebed-Melech the Cushite called to Jeremiah, "Put the worn cloths and rags under your armpits inside the ropes." Jeremiah did so. And they pulled Jeremiah up by the ropes and got him out of the pit. And Jeremiah remained in the prison compound.
And that's interesting
It's amazing.
because it actually gives the level of detail of how they kept him from getting rope burns. That's crazy. That's why when you read this, you go, this is not some imagination of like what might have happened. The person who wrote this sounds like it's Jeremiah, or at least dictated it, told him exactly what happened. I put these cloths underneath my arms so when they pulled me out, I wouldn't get a rope burn. And that's crazy. But it says he remained in the prison compound. And here, yeah.
A question.
Yeah.
So if, what's the guy's name, the guy from Ethiopia, does he go back to Ethiopia?
Ebed-Melech,
Yes.
we're not there yet.
Oh, okay.
We're not there yet.
He goes back and shares religion.
That's in the Christian story. I don't want you to get confused with the Christian story. In the Christian story, yes. In the Christian story, he becomes an evangelist himself. Yeah. All right. Well, it's important because he sets up the Ethiopian church, which becomes one of the oldest churches in the church. No, that's the Egyptian church. There's the Ethiopic church too. So there's Ethiopic and there's Coptic, but both of them are super old. They're the oldest churches in Christendom. So Ethiopic are even further south, and they believe actually that they have the Ark. The Ethiopic church, they believe that they have the Ark of the Covenant. The Coptic church is under attack by some people in Egypt who are
This
trying to
could be
destroy
a
Christians.
moment between the Jews and the Christians.
Why?
Just because he's educated, he learned Hebrew, he learned.
Who, the Ethiopian? Oh,
Yeah, he went to Jerusalem, right?
listen,
Listen.
everybody would tell you there's no reason to believe that these religions wouldn't have essentially been the same if it hadn't been for, as Reverend Lynn says, if it wasn't for Paul. So, and again, telling people that they got to be different, that you're giving up that stuff.
Convention or convocation or whatever of the church was over circumcision.
Yeah.
You have to be circumcised in order to be a Christian.
Yep. So these questions, again, for, 600 years later are big, but so what happens to this guy though? Ebed Melech is a good question. That's another good question. What happens to him after he saves, and he's caught up in this chaos too of Jerusalem? What's going to go on? So again, he's brought up out of the compound, and here's what happens.
King Zedekiah sent for the prophet Jeremiah and
Crazy.
had him brought to him at the third entrance of the house of God. And the king said to Jeremiah, I want to ask you something. Don't conceal anything from me. Jeremiah answered the king, if I tell you, you'll surely kill me. And if I give you advice, you won't listen to me.
Oh, that's good.
He says to him, what different? Why should I tell you anything?
Thereupon King Zedekiah secretly promised Jeremiah on oath, as God lives, who has given us this life, I will not put you to death or leave you in the hands of those who seek your life. Then Jeremiah said to Zedekiah, thus said the Eternal, the God of his hosts, the God of Israel, if you surrender to the officers of the king of Babylon, your life will be spared, and this city will not be burned down. You and your household will live. But if you do not surrender to the officers of the king of Babylon, this city will be delivered into the hands of the Chaldeans, who will burn it down, and you will not escape from them. King Zedekiah said to Jeremiah, I am worried about the Judeans who have defected to the Chaldeans, that they, the Chaldeans, might hand me over to them to abuse me. They will not hand you over, Jeremiah replied. Listen to God's voice, to what I tell you, that it may go well with you and your life be spared. For this is what God has shown me if you refuse to surrender. All the women who are left in the palace of the king of Judah shall be brought out to the officers of the king of Babylon, and they shall say, those who were your friends have seduced you and vanquished you. Now that your feet are sunk in the mire, they have turned their backs on you. They will bring out all your wives and children to the Chaldeans, and you yourself will not escape from them. You will be captured by the king of Babylon, and this city shall be burned down. Zedekiah said to Jeremiah, don't let a soul know about this conversation, or you will die.
So this is the crazy position that Zedekiah is in. He believes him, but he can't let anybody know. Don't tell anybody. And he says, if you tell people, I will kill you, right? So he's told him what will happen to him. And Zedekiah is really in a horrible situation. We have to feel bad for Zedekiah. I mean, he's a weak guy, but what's he going to do? Because it says everything what he's worried about. He's worried about his own people that don't want to surrender. He's worried about the fact that if he does surrender, the people that are a part of the band that have already gone over the Chaldeans will torture him and punish him anyways. So he's like, where's he going to go? So he doesn't really know what to do. He's in a no-win situation, but the no-win situation is even worse than you might have thought. You might have thought, well, if he goes over to the Chaldeans, they'll just keep him and, that'll be the end of it. He's saying, no, the people who are mad at me for not going over there earlier are going to punish me. So I can't even go over there. So that tells you what his thought process is, what's going on in his mind. Isn't just, well, if I go there, then I'm going to be captured and I'll be put in prison. He's worried that his own people there are going to beat him up. Yeah. This is terrible. So here's the continuation of what he tells him.
If the officials should hear that I have spoken with you, and they should come and say to you, tell us what you said to the king, hide nothing from us, or we'll kill you. And what did the king say to you? Say to them, I was presenting my petition to the king not to send me back to the house of Jonathan to die there.
So he tells him what to say. What's the lie to tell him? If they tell you, what did you tell the king? This is what you tell them. Tell them I didn't want to go back to jail. That's what you tell them. You don't tell them what we talked about. He tells them exactly what to say to him.
Doesn't sound like he's a king in control.
Nope. But he is not just saying, I don't care. He's telling them what to say. And he's saying, this is what you tell him.
All the officials did come to Jeremiah to question him, and he replied to them just as the king had instructed him. So they stopped questioning him, for the conversation had not been overheard. Jeremiah remained in the prison compound until the day Jerusalem was captured. When
Now-
Jerusalem was captured,
They're telling you this right now. There seems to be a bad break here. Okay. It's telling us that this is not where this should break. And that these couple lines before this, these next two lines are an editorial insertion to tell us when this is happening. Okay, so what they're saying is, well, let's read these two lines.
in the 9th year of King Zedekiah of Judah, in the 10th month, King Nebuchadrezzar of Babylon moved against Jerusalem with his whole army, and they laid siege to it. And in the 11th year of Zedekiah, on the 9th day of the 4th month, the walls of the city were breached.
Yeah, and this is when the destruction of the temple in Jerusalem is going to happen. Now, this is telling us again how long it took. Well, if it started in the 9th year in the 10th month of the 9th year, that means that it took a year and a half for them to breach the walls. So it wasn't overnight that this happened. Okay, so that's telling us when this happens, and we still commemorate the day when the walls were breached. In the month of Tammuz, we commemorate the days that the walls were breached. It's a minor fast day, which means we fast from sunrise to sundown on that day. Not like Tisha B'Av, where we do a whole day. That's when the temple was actually burned. But on this day, when the walls were breached, we remember that day. If we look at this, so we go back to here, when Jerusalem was captured, and then
All the officers of the king of Babylon entered and took up quarters at the middle gate. Nergal-Sarezer, Samgar-Nebo, Sarsachim the Rabsaris, Nergal-Sarezer the Rabmag, and all the rest of the officers of the king of Babylon.
these are all very Babylonian names. These are all names of their gods. Nergal, Samgar. These are all Sarsechem, Nergal, Nergal, and this translation is those are titles. So Rabmag and Rabsaris are titles. So the word saris comes from the same words as the eunuch, the word for eunuch. So this would be like Rabsaris. So the word Rav, or like rabbi, is like the master, the master eunuch, and the Rabmag was the Rav, the head Mag, which is
Does that imply that all Ethiopians are eunuchs?
no. Actually, we read later on that Daniel is a eunuch. So you don't have to be
But why
Ethiopian.
so many here?
Because the Babylonians were very into that, and more so than other cultures. And later on, again, they become, as we read in the Persian period, they were the heads of, they were the head officers during the time of Queen Esther, right? During the eunuchs are all over the place in the book of Esther.
Because they can be trusted.
Yeah. And they were put in charge of important things like not only the harem, but also the finances and everything else, because they've shown their loyalty. So again, Rav Saris is like Rav. Whenever you see the Rav in a title, that's Babylonian. It's Aramaic or Babylonian for head or chief. Rav Saris is the head Saris, the head eunuch, and the Rav Mag is like the head mage. The word Mag, magi, magic, all those words are connected. These are the
chief wizard.
chief wizard, yeah, sages, the sage.
Hmm.
The mage was also the magi were also, they were smart guys. So these are the head officials. So they've taken up quarters in the middle gates. Why? Because they've breached Jerusalem and now they're in Jerusalem, these guys. That's how close they are. They're actually in the inner, they're in the next court the next wall. They've gotten through one wall, the outer wall.
When King Zedekiah of Judah saw them, he and all the soldiers fled. They left the city at night by way of the king's garden through the gate between the double walls, and he set out toward the Arabah.
King ran away. Zedekiah tried to escape. We have a place right by the Damascus gate where it says Zedekiah's tunnel. We don't know that is exactly where he was, but it says that he went out towards the Arabah, which again, if you look at the note, it says hoping to escape to the Jordan. So we call, the Damascus gate is on the east side of the city. And so he went out the east side. So we have a place that's called Zedekiah's tunnel because we believe that according to tradition, that's where Zedekiah tried to get out of the city. He tried to escape. He didn't want to be turned over to the Chaldeans. Jeremiah already told him he's going to be turned over, but he doesn't want to do that. You heard why. He doesn't want to, he's worried. He's worried that his own people there are going to hold him responsible. Because now you decide now you're surrendering. You didn't really surrender. You got captured. If you had surrendered in the first place, if you listened to Jeremiah, and we assume that Jeremiah was not the only person who was telling people to leave because they're already defectors. It says their people had already gone over to the Chaldeans. If you had done that in the first place, you could have spared all this destruction. So you could imagine that Zedekiah does not want to deal with Judeans who are saying, why did you do this? You caused our beautiful temple to be destroyed. Now we're going to kill you. It's fair. So he escapes. He tries to escape. Well, he does escape.
But the Chaldean troops pursued them, and they overtook Zedekiah in the steps of Jericho. They captured him and brought him before King Nebuchadrezzar of Babylon at Riblah in the region of Hamath, and he put him on trial.
So that, first of all, tells us that Nebuchadnezzar is not there. He wasn't in Jerusalem. Didn't say he was, by the way. I just want to make it clear. He was not there. He was with his armies in Hamath, which is in Syria. So he's not far. He's in the region. He's not back in Babylonia. He's not in Babylon. He's not in one of the capitals. He's in Syria. But he's on battle. He's on a battle. He's on war. He's out on battle. But he's there at Riblah. Okay.
The king of Babylon had Zedekiah's sons slaughtered at Riblah before his eyes. The king of Babylon had all the nobles of Judah slaughtered. Then the eyes of Zedekiah were put out, and he was chained in bronze fetters, that he might be brought to Babylon.
And there it is. The last thing that Zedekiah sees is his own children being killed in front of him. That will be the last thing you see. That's what Nebuchadnezzar decided would be a fitting punishment for him. Now, didn't kill him. Jeremiah said he wouldn't be killed. So Jeremiah wasn't wrong. Jeremiah's not wrong. But that's pretty horrific. And Nebuchadnezzar did not have to do that. So God let Nebuchadnezzar destroy the temple. God did not tell Nebuchadnezzar that that's what he has to do to Zedekiah. Zedekiah's messed up. He's a weak king. He has no choices. Maybe what could he have done? But that didn't have to happen. To use John's terminology, that's very Game of Thrones. Right, John?
Well, I was gonna bring that up and say that one guy must have been a Babylonian. Right, what was his name in GOT? I don't know. What his name. He wasn't-
Sorry,
he was Jewish.
Wasn't his name Saras?
What-
No, what was it? Varus.
Sarah.
It's pretty close to Saras. Anyways, Saris is what a eunuch is. That's the Hebrew word for Sarah. Yeah. So this is what the punishment was for him. It's a tough thing to read. It's hard to read that and not and not
What's worse, they
feel
had
a
to
sense of.
cauterize the wounds, right? Otherwise he would have, so that's even worse for not to die.
Yep,
It's also very visual.
it's visual.
Yes, it's-
It's very visual. Visual, yeah, you're right. Yep.
The Chaldeans burned down the king's palace and the houses of the people by fire, and they tore down the walls of Jerusalem. The remnant of the people that was left in the city and the defectors who had gone over to him, the remnant of the people that was left, were exiled by Nebuzaradan, the chief of the guards, to Babylon. But some of the poorest people who owned nothing were left in the land of Judah by Nebuzaradan, the chief of the guards, and he gave them vineyards and fields at that time.
So it tells us that not.
A little
all-
redistribution going
Yeah, it's a
on.
little redistribution of wealth. It tells you that they did not all get thrown out, but the richest people were. They were taken away. They were exiled. And yeah, this was a horrible destruction based on what we know archaeologically. This happened, and when the Jews came back 7 years later to rebuild Jerusalem with a Persian permission, what they built was not as big as what was destroyed. It took years and years for that to happen, hundreds of years. It took to the time, of the Romans for Jerusalem to come back from Greeks or Romans from that period. It took that long for the Jews to rebuild Jerusalem to what it was like during this period. So this was a pretty massive destruction. And it didn't take 70 years for it to be rebuilt. It took a few hundred years for it to be rebuilt. That's how bad it was. The destruction was pretty complete.
King Nebuchadnezzar of Babylon had given orders to Nebuzaradan, the chief of the guards, concerning Jeremiah. Take him and look after him. Do him no harm, but grant whatever he asks of you. So Nebuzaradan, the chief of the guards, and Nebuchadnezzar, the Rabsaris, and Nergal-Sarezer, the Rabmag, and all the commanders of the king of Babylon sent and had Jeremiah brought from the prison compound. They committed him to the care of Gedaliah, son of Ahikam, son of Shaphan, that he might be left at liberty in a house. So he dwelt among the people.
Okay, so he stays in Jerusalem. He doesn't get taken in exile. He gets to stay in the land. Yeah.
When we were discussing Melech, right, the Ethiopian.
Mm-hmm.
So they're in that line, in my translation, right?
Yep. Nebuzaradan.
No, the first one. Nebuchadnezzar, chief of the eunuchs.
Uh-huh.
That means there was not just.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, there were a bunch of them. So,
Which means they migrated from Ethiopia.
or they were brought in because they were known to be good at their jobs. I think, look, we don't know what exactly is going on there, but it seems like that's a thing. That's what I'm trying to tell you. The Ethiopian eunuch as a thing was, look, people have speculated that it's because, I'm just going to tell you what they've speculated. They speculated that to some extent it's because these guys were bigger than other people. We don't know for sure. But if Ethiopia, if the land of Cush also includes parts of like Sudan and some of like the Dinka and Nuer people, these are big people. You remember some of those Dinka tribesmen Some of them, they even tried to get to play in the NBA. That these are maybe larger, humans. These are bigger guys. And so for a bigger guy to not only be physically big, but also to be a eunuch, and also to be entrusted with really important things, might have been just the thing that people were like, that's a visual thing.
Cultural fashion.
Yeah, but it's a big thing, right? It's a thing that people saw and were like that. Oh, that's one of those guys. Like people knew that's one of those guys. So it's possible. I mean, I think it's at least possible. I'm not saying that that's what it was, but I think it might have been a possibility that people looked at that and said, that is a big dude. And he's much bigger physically than other people. And he's imposing. He's scary. He's physically imposing. So, but it tells us right here that they leave him with Gedaliah. Gedaliah is now in charge. Now, this is the first time that we read about this guy in Jeremiah, but we did read about him briefly in the book of Kings. Gedaliah is the person that the Babylonians put in charge as governor. Does anyone remember what happens to Gedaliah? Ishmael, son of Netaniah, and 10 men who were with him murdered Gedaliah, together with most of the Jews who joined him and many Babylonians whom Nebuchadnezzar had left with Gedaliah. Yeah, we'll read about it. Folks, it means the Jews didn't stop revolting after the temple was destroyed. The temple's not even there, and they're still fighting the Babylonians. They killed the Babylonian governor, Jewish governor, that was put in charge. To lament the assassination of Gedaliah, which left Judah devoid of any Jews and Jewish rule, completed the destruction of the first temple, the Jewish sages established the third day of Tishrei as the fast of Gedaliah. Although Gedaliah's assassination perhaps occurred on the first day of Tishrei, the fast is observed so it would not interfere with Rosh Hashanah. So a lot of people say, wait a second, I'm going to grab it right here because I have them right here. You can grab one. Here's the Jewish calendar. And people go, wait a second. I looked at my Jewish calendar here and I opened up my calendar, and right after Rosh Hashanah, right there in my Rosh Hashanah calendar, it says on September 18th, the fast of Gedaliah. What do I do with that? I have Rosh Hashanah and then the next day as a fast day? Yeah, Tzom Gedaliah. For thousands of years, we've had a fast to remember that this innocent dude got murdered for doing nothing other than trying to keep the peace. And again, it might have happened at Rosh Hashanah, but he was killed by his own people. He was killed by us. And so to remember that day, we've been fasting for 2,500 years for what we did to an innocent guy. Now, a lot of people don't fast anymore for it, but it is on the calendar. It is something that we've done for a long time. And observant Jews do fast on Tzom Gedaliah. So this poor guy is doing his job and he is protecting Jeremiah. And here's the guy doing his job. All right. So Jeremiah is there. He's there here in a house, with in a house with Gedaliah. But then we go back to this, the word of God while he was still confined in the prison compound. So this is now stepping back in time. So this was before. And to some extent, again, the nonlinear form of this book is confusing But the editor wanted you to know when this prophecy comes from. And so this is the last part that we'll be reading today. This goes back in time to when he was still under arrest. And here's what it says.
Go and say to Ebed-Melech the Cushite, thus said God of hosts, the God of Israel, I am going to fulfill my words concerning this city for disaster, not for good, and they shall come true on that day in your presence. But I will save you on that day, declares God. You shall not be delivered into the hands of those you dread. I will rescue you, and you shall not fall by the sword. You shall escape with your life because you trusted me, declares
Now,
God.
why is that line there? Why are those last three lines there? To kind of remind us that Jeremiah knew that he was going to be okay. But again, it was not, it was from back when he was in jail. So here's another prophecy, again, chapter 40, where we're going to finish. Let's take a look.
The word that came to Jeremiah from God after Nebuzaradan, the chief of the guards, set him free at Ramah, to which he had taken him, chained in fetters, among those from Jerusalem and Judah who were being exiled to Babylon. The chief of the guards took charge of Jeremiah, and he said to him, the eternal your God threatened this place with this disaster, and now God has brought it about by acting on the threat, because you sinned against God and did not pay heed. That is why this has happened to you. Now I release you this day from the fetters that were on your hands. If you would like to go with me to Babylon, come, and I will look after you. And if you don't want to come with me to Babylon, you need not. See, the whole land is before you. Go wherever seems good and right to you.
Yeah, so this story we didn't get before when we had what happens to Jeremiah. Here it seems that Jeremiah actually had a choice. He could have gone into Babylon with the rest of the people who were getting taken into exile. They're getting taken captive.
But Jeremiah still did not turn back or go to Gedaliah, son of Ahikam, son of Shaphan, who the king of Babylon has put in charge of the towns of Judah, and stay with him among the people, or go wherever you want to go. The chief of the guards gave him an allowance of food and dismissed him. So Jeremiah came to Gedaliah, son of Ahikam, at Mizpah, and stayed with him among the people who were left in the land.
Yeah, we could have had this information in the last chapter in the middle of their recounting what happens to him. But here it actually tells us that he had a choice. He could have gone into Babylonian exile, or he could have stayed in the land of Judah, which is the land with Gedaliah. And that's what he decided to do. It was Jeremiah's choice. So Jeremiah basically tells us, I was given the choice and I stayed here with the people. That's what I did. So it didn't say that Jeremiah was, basically he's given the choice.
That the army officers in the open country and their men with them heard that the king of Babylon had put Gedaliah, son of Ahikam, in charge of the region, and that he had put in his charge the men, women, and children of the poorest in the land, those who had not been exiled to Babylon.
Well, we heard that already. That, the poor people were now in charge. But it also says that there were army officers in the open country, meaning they were out in the field when the siege ended and Jerusalem was destroyed. They were not in the siege, but they're army officers who were in power, and they're not poor people. So what's going to happen here. You know what's going to happen here. I already told you what's going to happen here. Gedaliah gets killed because this isn't going to, nobody's going to deal with this. you're going to let the poor people who didn't have any power, you're going to put them in charge of Jerusalem? The soldiers who were on the outside said, are you kidding me?
So they with their men came to Gedaliah at Mizpah, Ishmael, son of Netaniah, Johanan and Jonathan, the sons of Kareah, Sariah, son of Tahnumet, the sons of Ephi, the Netophathite, and Jezaniah, son of the Maakathite. Gedaliah, son of Ahikam, son of Shaphan, reassured them and their men, saying, do not be afraid to serve the Chaldeans. Stay in the land and serve the king of Babylon, and it will go well with you. I am going to stay in Mizpah to attend upon the Chaldeans who will come to us, but you may gather wine and figs and oil and put them in your own vessels and settle in the towns you have occupied. Likewise, all the Judeans who were in Moab, Ammon, and Edom, or who were in other lands, heard that the king of Babylon had let a remnant stay in Judah, and that he had put Gedaliah, son of Ahikam, son of Shaphan, in charge of them.
Everybody understands what's happening? Babylonians put Gedaliah as the governor, a Jewish governor, in charge, and the people who are living in the other areas nearby hear it.
All these Judeans came from all the places to which they had scattered. They came to the land of Judah, to Gedaliah at Mizpah, and they gathered large quantities of wine and figs. Johanan, son of Kareah, and all the army officers in the open country came to Gedaliah at Mizpah and said to him, do you know that King Baalis of Ammon has sent Ishmael, son of Netaniah, to kill you? But Gedaliah, son of Ahikam, would not believe them.
Yeah, well, I already told you what's going to happen, but the point is that this is tragedy that gets compounded by another tragedy, which is the Judeans are being played against each other. And here it tells you specifically who did it. One of the people who did it was the king, the Ammonite king. What is going on here? He's causing problems. He's causing problems. He's basically saying, why do we want the Judeans to have power at all? And he basically encourages this guy Ishmael to kill him. This is, guys, this is a book of prophecy. But as you can read today, I mean, it just so happens we're reading chapter 37 through 39, 40. How many words of prophecy have you seen? Literally like 4 lines of prophecy. This is all narrative. This is a story. It's a sad story. It's an interesting story. It's a definitely a teaching moment, a learning moment for us. But man, this is really, really crazy. And the level of detail here is scaringly scary. It's a scary story. Because you can hear people playing this stuff out all the time. In politics, even today, where people set people up. And in some cases, people are even told they're being set up. So here's what happens.
Johanan, son of Kareah, also said secretly to Gedaliah at Mizpah, let me go and strike down Ishmael, son of Netaniah, and nobody else will know about it. Otherwise he will kill you, and all the Judeans who have gathered about you will be dispersed, and the remnant of Judah will perish. But Gedaliah, son of Ahikam, answered Johanan, son of Kareah, do not do such a thing. What you are saying about Ishmael is not true.
So they even had an opportunity to get rid of this threat. And Gedaliah doesn't believe it. How do we know this stuff happened? Who's going to make that up? Who's going to make up that Gedaliah was warned? Somebody tells him, I'll take care of the threat. And he says, no, don't worry about it. And here's the line. This is where we finish.
In the 7th month, Ishmael, son of Netaniah, son of Elishama, who was of royal descent and one of the king's commanders, came with 10 men to Gedaliah, son of Ahikam, at Mizpah, and they ate together there at Mizpah. Then Ishmael, son of Netaniah, and the 10 men who were with him arose and struck down Gedaliah, son of Ahikam, son of Shaphan, with the sword and killed him, because the king of Babylon had put him in charge of the land.
So they murdered him. And it says why they murdered him, because he was there put in charge by the Babylonians. And that's their justification for doing it. So he was warned, you didn't listen. They were going to neutralize the guy who was responsible. He said, no, don't do it. And he died.
Ishmael also killed all the Judeans who were with him, with Gedaliah in Mizpah, and the Chaldean soldiers who were stationed there.
Oh, so yeah, so they also killed Babylonians. What do you think is going to happen? Right? This was an act of war. Again, you might be saying, wait a second, didn't it just say the 7th month? That's not Rosh Hashanah, that's the first month. Remember, in the biblical period, the calendar started at Passover in the time of Nisan in that month. And that was the first month. So this is the 7th month. This is the half year time. Again, it was not until the Babylonian period that we started keeping Rosh Hashanah as the beginning of the year. So it says in the 7th month, it doesn't say what day. Again, we think it might have been the first day, which would be Rosh Hashanah, but we can't fast on Rosh Hashanah. Again, we remember this day that this happened. Gedaliah, innocent guy. An innocent guy. Yeah. So they also killed the Babylonians, and here's what it says.
The second day after Gedaliah was killed, when no one else knew about it, some men came from Shechem, Shiloh, and Samaria, 80 of them, their beards shaved, their garments torn, and their bodies gashed, carrying grain offerings and frankincense to present at the house of God. Ishmael, son of Netaniah, went out from Mizpah to meet them, weeping as he walked. As he met them, he said to them, "Come to Gedaliah, son of Ahikam." When they came inside the town, Ishmael, son of Netaniah, and the men who were with him slaughtered them and threw their bodies into a cistern. This is very Game of Thrones.
Yeah. Yeah. And you're right. Yes, it's the same word. It's a bore. It's a cistern. Yeah, the cistern, pretty interesting motif here. But yes, they threw their bodies in
That's
this.
what you did if it's like throwing them into the lake now.
Yeah. Yep.
But there were 10 men among them who said to Ishmael, "Don't kill us. We have stores hidden in a field, wheat, barley, oil, and honey." So he stopped and did not kill them along with their fellows.
Crazy.
The cistern into which Ishmael threw all the corpses of the men he had killed in the affair of Gedaliah was the one that King Asa had constructed on account of King Baasha of Israel. That was the one which Ishmael, son of Netaniah, filled with corpses.
Yeah. So it tells us exactly which cistern it was built by King Asa of Judah when he was going to war with King Baasha, 200 years before. So they're telling you exactly where the bodies were buried. They knew where the bodies were. It's crazy. Crazy story.
Ishmael carried off all the rest of the people who were in Mizpah, including the daughters of the king, all the people left in Mizpah over whom Nebuzaradan, the chief of the guards, had appointed Gedaliah, son of Ahikam. Ishmael, son of Netaniah, carried them off and set out to cross over to the Ammonites. Yohanan, son of Kareah, and all the army officers with him heard of all the crimes committed by Ishmael, son of Netaniah. They took all their men and went to fight against Ishmael, son of Netaniah, and they encountered him by the great pool in Gibeon. When all the people held by Ishmael saw Yohanan, son of Kareah, and all the army officers with him, they were glad. All the people whom Ishmael had carried off from Mizpah turned back and went over to Yohanan, son of Kareah. But Ishmael, son of Netaniah, escaped from Yohanan with 8 men and went to the Ammonites.
So You can see that there's chaos going on back in the land. And at least some of the army that had survived was backing Gedaliah. Some of them were backing Ishmael, but yeah, this is total chaos. By the way, you can see that the people were worshiping God at Mitzpah. The temple was destroyed and they were still offering up something in Mitzpah, which tells you that at least in the land of Judah, people were still offering up sacrifices to God. Interesting, right? So Ishmael flees back to the Ammonites who are supporting this mini rebellion.
Johanan, son of Kareah, and all the army officers with him took all the rest of the people whom he had rescued from Ishmael, son of Netaniah, from Mizpah after he had murdered Gedaliah, son of Ahikam, the men, soldiers, women, children, and eunuchs whom Johanan had brought back from Gibeon.
Yeah, so you can see the eunuchs are still around there, right? There's still some eunuchs.
They
No.
set out and stopped at Gerut Himham near Bethlehem on their way to go to Egypt because of the Chaldeans, for they were afraid of them, because Ishmael, son of Netaniah, had killed Gedaliah, son of Ahikam, whom the king of Babylon had put in charge of the land.
And that's where we're going to end. What's interesting about that is they are going to Egypt. They're not going back to Jerusalem. They're not going back to Mitzpah. They're not going back. Why? Because they don't want to be around when the Babylonians come back. Guess what? We'll read next time. That's how Jeremiah winds up in Egypt.
Now, there were daughters of the king still alive? That's what it said.
It says that there's still people who are, it says that there are men, women, soldiers, children. It doesn't say they're necessarily,
It said up there, the daughters of the king.
it said daughters of king too?
Mhm.
Maybe earlier. Did it? Yeah, it says daughters of the king. Yeah,
Yes.
you're right. So it says daughters, it says daughters of the king.
Why couldn't the daughters-
Yeah, so he didn't kill, Nebuchadnezzar didn't kill the daughters, but it tells you that these remnants of Judean nobility didn't want to go back after this rebellion. Because even though they weren't responsible, even though they were caught up in it, and even though they survived, they may not survive the Babylonian punishment for what happened. So this is a complete disaster. So chapter 42, we're going to read next time. This is going to be the continuation of this story. Chapter 42 is a continuation of that story. And then what's really interesting is that's also in chapter 43. Chapter 43. And then as we get into chapter 44, which we'll also read next week, probably we'll just get into it. We're going to start reading the last part of Jeremiah, the last few chapters, chapters 44, chapters 40, well, wait, I went past 46. Oh, wait, 45 is very short. Chapter 46, Jeremiah speaks according to the nations, the Egyptians. Philistines, exactly. The Philistines, Moab. These are the last part of once we get out of the narrative, we get into prophecies against the nations. And this is what he finished. This is how Jeremiah's book finishes. This is the Ammonites, Moabites, the Ammonites. And as we get to the end of Jeremiah, he has these prophecies against people. including the Babylonians themselves. And so, well, we were not going to get to the Babylonians next week, but the Babylonian prophecy, and then that's chapter 51. And then, as you can see, there's going to be one more chapter, and that's it. So the last part of Jeremiah goes back to prophecies, and it's specifically prophecies against the nations. But what you pretty much are reading right now in this weird way of the way Jeremiah tells it is why there's no there the chaos that happened after the destruction of the temple was the destruction was only that was only part of it. I want to say it's the beginning because it was pretty bad. It's pretty like 90% of it, but it wasn't everything. And the chaos that comes afterwards, this murder that we just read about, this assassination, it's part of the tragedy too. And it reminds us that like the tragedy doesn't end when the war is over, right? There were a lot of stuff, we're only starting to come to terms with what happened in Europe after World War II was over, and that's all been documented. It didn't stop. It did, like the idea that the war's over, the woman kisses the guy and everybody dances in the streets.
Fade to black.
That's not what happened. That's not what happened. And it's not what happened to a lot of the Jews who survived. Because as you know, a lot of them, hundreds of thousands of them, sat in DP camps for the next 2 to 3 years. Not everybody, but thousands of people. And it wasn't just them. I mean, it was survivors, German, ordinary German citizens. But there were Jews that sat in there were Jews who sat in prison camps because they had nowhere to go. And another thing that a lot of people are starting to talk about now is the fact that even after the Holocaust was over, it didn't mean that people stopped being killed, because here was the Kielce pogrom, which was in 1946, when 42 Jews. Yeah. Yeah. Now, the deadliest pogrom against Polish Jews after the Second World, but it wasn't the only one. So.
We talked about Babylon.
Yeah.
The Talmud.
Yeah.
Babylon Talmud. I know there's.
Yeah.
When was that written?
So the Babylonian Talmud doesn't get. We don't really start the Babylonian Talmud's composition isn't until like the 2nd or 3rd century. So we were there for a long time. But remember, when we talk about the Babylonian Talmud, we're not just talking about Babylonia. It's called the Babylonian Talmud, but a lot of the work for it went on throughout the Persian Empire. So there wasn't one city. It wasn't just written in one city. The rabbis who lived in the Persian Empire, it really should be called the Persian Talmud, but we call it the Babylon, the Jerusalem Talmud. Sometimes it's called the Palestinian Talmud. It's usually called the Jerusalem Talmud. In Hebrew, it's called the Yerushalmi. A lot of the scholarship over the years, it called it the Palestinian Talmud, but it's called the Yerushalmi. It also wasn't really written in Jerusalem. It was written in the northern part of the country where we oftentimes take people on our trips to Tzipori, to the area where Jesus's people lived too, in the Galilee. So most of what we call the Jerusalem Talmud was written in the Galilee. It wasn't written in Jerusalem. Actually, none of it was really written in Jerusalem. Because the Jerusalem Talmud, so the Jerusalem Talmud and the Babylonian Talmud are both commentaries on the Mishnah, right? The Mishnah is the same for both. But the Mishnah was written during the time of Jesus, and then after that is when the Talmud, the Gemara was written. The Babylonian Gemara is written for a community in exile. It's written for a community that lives outside of the land of Israel. So it's primarily dealing with issues of everyday life. How do you decide court cases? How do you celebrate the holidays? The Jerusalem Talmud is dealing with things like, how do you take care of the sabbatical year? How do you run the Shemitah? You know, how do you run agricultural issues? Jews didn't live in the land of Israel, so who cared? Didn't matter. So that's why we didn't really study it. Now that Jews live in Israel, the Jerusalem Talmud is studied a lot more.
Is it?
It's studied in Israel by rabbis in Israel. It's studied a little bit outside, but why? If you're living in Israel, yeah, but if you're a Jew living in the diaspora, so they finally finished a definitive translation of it, the Art Scroll translation, but it's 2023, and they finally, there were other translations, but the definitive translation of it just was finished. Not this year, it was finished a couple years ago. But yeah, I mean, I never studied. The only time I study it is out of context, where somebody says, oh, you should read this section of the Jerusalem Talmud, has an interesting. I also find that there's less midrash in it. There's less legend in it. So I don't study it as much, also because there's a lot of the Talmud that I also find interesting from the midrashic standpoint.
Right.
I'll tell you when they finished it. They finished it when did they finish it? They finished it. It was finished in. Let me see. I'm trying to see if it was finished in. Hold it. That's the Daf Yomi. It was finished. Well, I'll show you. It was pretty. It seems like it was. It seems like it was recent, because it was. Here, you can buy it. I mean, it's pretty expensive, but it's no, wait, here it is. It's here, I'll show you. It was finished in 3/6/2022. So it's interesting. No, here's
2005.
2005. So that one was. Well, wait a second.
Well, that's the
No,
first.
that's that volume. The complete one wasn't finished until
see.
2022. The Brachot one was like the first one that they released. So it was done over 70. Yeah, I knew it wasn't 2000. I know I'm getting old, Rosemary, but I'm not that old. So it took about 17 years for them to release. I remember when I did the Babylonian Talmud, the Bavli, it took about 15 years. So yeah, this took about 15 years, 16 years. Oh yeah, it's 51 volumes. I think the art scroll Bavli is, I'll show you, and that's the one that most people get. They get I have this one at home, which I did as it was coming out. And this was 1997. So I was in rabbinical school while they had these. By the way, every time they released these, every rabbinical student was like, oh, thank God. Finally, they came out with this that they translated that text. So what they did when I was in rabbinical school, they purposely would pick texts that hadn't been translated by the Art Scroll yet. And if they gave you something you had to translate, because there were other translations, but they were so bad that, like, if you try to use those translations, everyone knew that you used that translation. It was written in weird, like archaic English. So you had to, once the Art Scroll came out, it blew up the ability to, it blew up your ability to make Talmud study. It was hard. It was hard even with the Art Scroll. But this literally came out as I was in rabbinical school. And so if you wanted to make it hard for the students, you would give them texts that had not been translated. So the full
In modern
English, yeah. These are modern English. So if you get the full set, if you get the full set, it is. I mean, I have it. It's a lot. I mean, it's a lot of volumes, but
They got volume 1.
Yeah, I mean, I can give, if you want to borrow one, I can give people volume 1 brachot right now. But I'm looking for where the full set is. Anyways, there's like 52 of them. I mean, so you saw the Babylonian is like, both of them are about 50 volumes. So if you see, if you see that they come out to,
Find it on eBay, not eBay,
well, you can see how much they are, right? They're $50 each or $45 each. So it's about $2,000 for a for the full set. You can imagine that this is a good gift for a person when they get married, right? So a groom will sometimes get the Talmud for them. But again, a lot of people, if you don't need it in English, you can get a Talmud set for for $100 if you're just getting the Hebrew or the Aramaic. If you're just getting the Aramaic, it's not a big deal. But this is really, really good. And some people, by the way, say this isn't even the best English translation of the Talmud. There's another English translation that came out a few years ago, which is the Steinsaltz. And I don't think the Steinsaltz I don't think it's fully translated, but the Steinsaltz Talmud, this one is really good, but it hasn't been finished yet. And the Steinsaltz is even more scholarly to some extent than the other ones. But you can see they charge $34 each for their volumes, and they have done, let's see if they've done all. Nope, they're not done yet. They've got 42 volumes that they've done. I think I have about 6 of these volumes, or maybe 6 or 7 of these volumes. But remember, like one tractate, like Brachot or Shabbat, comes in 2 parts. Eruvin comes in 2 parts, right? Pesach is in 2 parts. So some of them are in more than 1 part. Ketubot is in 2 parts. There might be some that are in 3. No, these ones would be in 3, but I don't have these ones. But Baba Kama, Baba Metzia, and Baba Batra, those are all 2 volumes. Each tractate is 2 volumes. Doing Talmud, yeah. Very good question. So when you go to Sefaria, which is what we use, right? They have it up. Now, what's interesting about it is that the translation that they have is, I'm just looking to see which translation it is. It's not a bad translation. It's not a super archaic translation, but yeah, so it's there. The interesting thing about the Talmud, by the way, the translations, what? Yeah. So here's the Mishnah, right? Here's the Mishnah section. And then the Gemara section starts right here. And you can see, but I want you to just see, you can see it right here.
It says it's Steinsaltz at the top of the page.
Does it? Yeah, it says, no, it's the day.
Well-
Well, wait a second. It says the day. Oh, yeah, I guess it's the Steinsaltz. Yeah.
She said Steinfeld.
No, the Steinsaltz, the corn. That's the one I told you is a good one. So yeah, what's interesting here, I wanted you to just see everything in bold is the literal translation, and everything that's not bold is elaboration, so you can understand it. That's why translating the Talmud is so hard, because if you look at it, if you read it, it would just say the poor stands outside and the homeowner stands inside. The poor person extended his hand into and placed into the hand of the homeowner. All that line right here, all those other words are not there. So that's why the elucidation, the extra part, is so necessary. Because if you read this without it, it's like written in shorthand. And if you don't understand the context, it's really, really hard to read Talmud. So that's why when somebody gives you a translation, you're like, oh my gosh, I don't even know how to translate that. It just says 2 words. How did you just get all those other words? Right? So that's why 7 words, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Wait, 1, 2, 3, 6 words is all of these words. 6 words is everything here. How do you translate that if you don't understand? If you don't, if all you can do is translate the words, how do you get that? So it's really important to have a good translation there, unless you know Talmud really, really well. So, and I will tell you, I don't. No, I mean, I don't know Talmud like I know Torah. I know Torah better than the people that know Talmud, but they know Talmud way better. Which one would I rather know? I'm not going to get there. Obviously, the one that I learned is the thing that I know is what I think is important. All right, folks, we'll see you. We will not be in person next week. Okay. We are online. We're online next week, folks. And you're not even here. You have another test. Good luck with your tests. Don't get any wrong answers.
I try not to.
All right. All right, everybody. Don't get any wrong answers. So we'll be online, folks. Take care, everybody.